Welcome to A Place for Film, the IU Cinema podcast. On this week's episode, we're talking to documentary filmmaker Doug Blush. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Andy Hunsucker.
And I'm Sarah Doyle.
And Jason is out this week, but he'll be back soon. With us this week on the show is documentary filmmaker Doug Blush. Doug, you are an editor and a director. You edited These Amazing Shadows and Invisible War, which have both been two of my favorite documentaries from the last couple of years. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Sarah. It's great to be here.
Well, let's talk about Doug Blush, and let's talk about documentary filmmaking, because we've had a lot of different types of filmmakers on here, but I don't think we've ever had someone whose main thing was editing. Mm-hmm. I'm almost certain we've never had I think we've had documentarians on, but never as like a subject, as like with someone who actually makes documentaries.
We're hard to find.
Yeah.
You're always small, dark places for lots of time.
So let's just talk about how did you get interested in filmmaking, and how did you get into documentaries from there?
I think it's a twofold process. The first part was that, like most kids in the Midwest growing up in the way back in the day, my dad accidentally left a Super 8 movie camera laying around, and of course that's a dangerous weapon for any kid to pick up, because immediately I wanted to go make monster movies and blow things up, and it was just magical when we started getting those little things back from the drugstore, the little pouches of processed film, and we'd project these things and go, wow, we could do a lot of things with this.
Yeah.
But the documentary side of things, I think I really fell in love with that through photography. I was really fascinated by street photographers like Robert Frank and Gary Winogrand and those type of photographers. And I thought they seemed to be making documentaries in still images. And I just loved still photography. But the only way to really tell those stories beyond that was to go into motion pictures. And for a long time, I worked with narrative, but I was always just fascinated by documentary, and I knew I would eventually head that way.
Yeah. Pretty
much all the work I did over the years in some way or another was influenced or touched by documentary. And then when the opportunities came up, I just said, I'm going doc all the way. And I do not regret that. I love working in documentary. It's a great community.
Yeah.
Amazing projects. And the people that you meet and the things that you do there, they last long after the film's over. With narratives, you kind of pack it all up and you go home and you move on to your next thing. Documentaries, it's friends for life, or it's issues for life that you care about. And you do not let go, and they don't let you go.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an amazing field.
So you talk about documentary filmmakers as sort of a community. I mean, I'm sure we've got students who watch the show who would love to do documentaries. How do you get into documentaries? Do you just do it?
Is it like that? Make them nowadays. I
mean,
for people who are just coming into making films now, coming out of the university system or just independently wanting to make their own things, you have the resources that we could only dream of. And when I was starting out, the equipment is not expensive anymore. It's gorgeous looking. I mean, the footage is amazing. You can shoot in low light. You can shoot on the run. There have been documentaries made on iPhones. This Sugar Man this year had a few shots that were shot on an iPhone, and that won the Oscar. So, it is possible to use amazing different tools that you guys have now. GoPro cameras are being used, DSLRs. It's just a different world. And then the editing, which I think is the real power center of documentary filmmaking, and obviously I'm biased on that, but it's so democratic now. It's so democratized because you have this access to editing, where years ago, that was really the stopper. It was so expensive. You had to build things on tape, and then you had to, the final print had to come out on film, and it was just really, really an expensive process. Now, I mean, literally, you can load, if you want to make something really, right away, you can put it up on Vimeo or on YouTube, and you can get viewers immediately, or you can make a feature and go through the usual festival route or distribution route. But those things are so much more open than they used to be. So that's why you're seeing so many more documentaries being made.
Yeah.
Of course, with that comes great responsibility to make good ones, but I do know a lot of really talented and amazing filmmakers out there who are working in documentary now, which is just great.
Well, I think I've seen a few documentaries that have snuck their way onto Netflix that are like conspiracy theorist documentaries. That would have been a monumental effort back in the day. But now, just anyone can make any random whatever crazy idea they have. They can make a documentary about that, and it can get to Netflix, and lots of people can watch it.
And if something catches fire, who knows how far it can go.
I know. So most of your credits on your on your Internet Movie Database page are editing.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about that because, like you just said, editing is kind of the power of the documentary because anyone can go out and point a camera at something for however long. Most documentary people I talk to, they work on their films for multiple years.
yeah.
It's not a quick process.
Yeah.
And I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe you can correct me, I feel like the editor in a documentary is almost of equal importance to the director, or at least has to be there from almost day one to really come out with a good product at the end.
Ideally, yes. I mean, the best situations are when really the editor's involved maybe before the production's even started and is involved in a really kind of a writerly way in saying, okay, what is this going to look and feel like? What are you going to make this film about, first of all, but what is it going to feel like? What's the rhythm of it going to be? What are the aesthetics going to be? And I think the editor goes a long way to shaping that. The good ones do. I think there is a lot of power in being an editor if you have a director who's not sure where he or she wants to go with the story necessarily, because you can fill that vacuum. If you're really looking for story, sometimes you can save things out of the discard pile. And I've done that on many films. I've found, oh, what about these characters? And nobody else was looking that direction, but I pulled something up and said, hey, maybe this is where we get our central through line. And happily, that's happened a bunch of times, and I'm always happy when that happens. But a really good collaboration between a director and an editor is sort of like a co-writing team, I think. Sometimes you have very, very strong and talented directors like Kirby Dick, who's an amazing director. I mean, he's an extremely talented visionary of what he wants to do. So when I work with him, he has a lot of great ideas, and he's really kind of vetting every step of the way, and he doesn't let anything just go. You know, he really puts everything into it. Another one's Pat Creedon, who I've worked with many times, and he's a terrific guy too. He's really fun to work with. He's super collaborative. He always wants to hear what everybody has to throw into it. And those are examples of directors who bring a lot of vision to it, and also are good editors in their own right. They could edit their own films, but they, I think, very wisely choose not to, because you want that other set of eyes. You want somebody to catch those things. Some directors do edit their own stuff, and I think, if you know what you want, and you bring people in to say, wait, have viewings, make sure you screen this stuff, and say, wait, nobody gets it, and otherwise it's kind of hermetic, and you don't get a good feedback. But believe me, I root for the editors always, and it's my favorite craft in cinema. It's it's not to say I don't want to direct more. I do. I love shooting. I love doing the cinematography. Even the sound work, which I think is incredibly important in documentary and narrative. I love doing all those things. Editing, I think, is that most finessed craft of, particularly in documentary. So I love it the most.
I mean, I hear a number thrown out frequently about documentaries that you generally shoot 6 times as much footage as you actually use. It's like 6 to 1 is footage versus
that
actual.
Might be for narrative.
Okay.
I'd say, figure you've got an hour-and-a-half film, give or take. The amount of footage I've worked with ranges from 150 hours to over 1,000. So the math on that is a little different. It's actually more like 100 to 1 to 3. Was it 300 to 1? Yeah, that'd be about right.
Wow.
You're talking about a lot of footage, a whole lot of footage. It's a massive amount of material.
I do a lot of editing myself, so this fascinates me. I don't know if the people out there are interested at all, but how do you even start with 1,000 hours of footage? I mean,
you throw 900 hours of it away.
I edit this. This is like an hour-long show once a week. I can't even imagine having – I don't have 1,000 hours of footage yet built up in the time we've been doing this show.
Well, the good news is there are these wonderful and underappreciated people called assistant editors.
Yeah.
And I throw massive kudos out to the people who have suffered long and hard to cull down the footage, to look through things, to get rid of the things that we know we're not going to use. So sometimes there's just complete off-the-beam stuff that gets rejected by the director, or in collaboration with the editor, we say we're not going to go there, or we're not going to really consider this stuff. And between just throwing away junk and throwing away stuff you're not really going to use in the main film, you probably eliminate well over half the material right there. But the assistant editors also refine things, take out all the front and back parts of the interview, and clean things up, log things. On many documentaries I've been on, there are multiple editors. On Invisible War, I co-edited it with a great guy named Derek Boonstra, who kind of came in early and shaped a lot of the material initially, and then I came in and worked with Kirby to kind of make the main line of the film. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've seen documentaries with 7 or 8 editors, and that usually means the director took 9 years to make it, and the editor just couldn't stick around. Another one had to come in, and another one had to come in. It's a long, long process, and people don't get paid day to day. A lot of times it's like you shut down for 3 or 4 months. You go away, you work on something else, you come back, suddenly there's funding again, and you start working again. So it's an unusual system. Very different from narrative where it's
sure.
Production, done. Editing immediately. Okay, now you've got a finished print. It's out.
Well, and that's something I feel like on a narrative, you've got a script. So it's like the director can almost go on vacation for a couple months while the editor sort of puts everything together.
Hope so. Yeah. It's interesting because I've been offered a couple of narratives, and so far the scripts I've read, it's like, what's the challenge in that? Where are the intrigues for the editor? And I think I'm just spoiled by documentary because there's so many possibilities when you're faced with the pile of footage, a vague sense of where you want to go, and they're still shooting maybe, and the characters are still living out their lives, or the issue is still going on, and there's all kinds of left turns and surprises as you go. That's what I love about it. It's thrilling because you don't know day to day what you're going to discover or what's going to happen in the news. One of your characters, something major might happen in their lives. That just keeps it really interesting. With a narrative, there's the script. It's not going to change that much. An editor can have a huge impact, but it's very subtle with a narrative. Whereas in a documentary, it might be the editor seeing something and nobody else saw. And that's always thrilling. Yeah.
Well, and speaking of left turns, I was talking to a director, and I totally forget Don Argett, who directed Nuclear States of America. I think that's what the name of the film was. But the disaster in Japan happened while he was making his film, the nuclear disaster.
Exactly.
That totally changes the film. I mean, have you had an experience like that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Almost every documentary I've worked on, something major happened during that time to affect it in some way or another. The biggest example probably was IOUSA, which I did with Pat Creedon back in 2007. That film was made at a time when the stock market was at 14,000 and the economy was just ripping right along. And everybody said, okay, you're making a film about the economy? Really? Why? Nobody cares about the economy.
No.
I mean, it's doing great. Why would anybody go to a film like that? At Sundance, while we were showing it at Sundance, I believe somewhere in that week or the week before that, Lehman Brothers collapsed.
Wow.
And the first of several mortgage crises started. The economy literally melted down as the film was coming out. So, we actually re-edited the film after Sundance to take into account all the stuff that had happened. And then the presidential election heated up, and it was amazing to watch it all happen.
Yeah.
So, things happen. Surprises happen all the time.
Yeah.
With Invisible War, it was more what the reaction was to the film after it came out. And that was newsworthy enough that we went and reopened the film and added a few things to it just to say, hey, this stuff does matter. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Invisible War.
Sure.
Invisible War, we talked about it a lot on this show when it came out. This is a film about sexual assault and rape in the military and the prevalence of that. I can't imagine this was an easy film to make, either shooting it, editing it, living that footage as you're watching it. I mean, I was deeply affected by that film, and you had to watch another, 1,000 hours of footage to edit it. I mean, how do you deal with that as you're editing that?
I think that I learned a little bit about what I think therapists and doctors have to go through by having to have a little bit of a wall up a little bit. Because you just can't take it all in. It's so painful. And for these incredibly brave women and men who came forward, I mean, there's nothing harder. I didn't in any way suffer the kind of impact that they suffered because they were exposing these incredibly private moments of their lives and these terrible traumas that they'd been through on camera. And talk about level of trust. I mean, that's huge credit to Amy Ziering, our producer, who's really, really was fighting so hard for this topic, and Kirby, who would not let this go and would, absolutely kept digging deeper and deeper into why this was going on. The two of them are a really great team for interviewing people in really touchy situations like that. So I would receive all this stuff as it was coming in, and there are some interviews that were so harrowing and so painful that we knew we couldn't put them in the film because it would just be too much.
Wow.
I try every day not to let those come back because there's things I don't want to even remember. But the people who we did focus on in the film went through unbelievable traumas, and because they stood up, I mean, this is why things happen. So I think I keep my eye on the prize, and I say all the pain of watching this stuff is worth it in the end because we're trying to do something really important. And I try to be fairly analytical and not get too emotional until we screen the film or when we're at a festival and I see people for the first time. This was really emotional at Sundance. When Invisible War screened, that was the first time I got to meet all of these brave vets, these women and a couple of men who went through these traumas. And when everybody got together, it was just tears for a week. It was really something. But I think it made us all stronger and made us more resolved to keep going and fight on for the cause that this is all about.
Well, and I think what your film does a really great job of, what that film does such an amazing job of, is it says this horrible thing happened to them, and then the abuse started. It's like that's what the really horrifying thing was. It's like it's bad enough that you were violated in this way, but then you turn around and all the people you've trusted, you have to trust all of these people with your life as a soldier. They all betray you immediately. That was the part that was so shocking for me, and that's what really turned it from, this is bad. I'm sorry for those people, but that's what turned it into a real issue. That's what turned it into a real thing. Was that always something that you wanted to? Was that something you found, or was that something that was there from the start?
Yeah, I think what I really give Kirby a lot of credit for, because he's not interested in sort of making a reality show, find the perpetrator and bring them to justice film. That is what a lot of network shows do. That's kind of what the usual expectation is, oh, we've got a crime that's committed, let's go find that perpetrator, and we have a happy ending.
Yeah.
Okay, the person goes to jail. He was concerned, and Amy was concerned with what was really important, which was the system that allows and enables predators to roam free in the military and in other systems too. I think there's a great comparison to issues that the Catholic Church has had, that issues that Penn State had a while back. It's a closed system of authority with no external judicial check, and the goal of the movie really was to call that out, So the whole point in the end, and I think it's really well kind of threaded by Kirby's intent to get back to the system, is to say change the system and the problem will go away. Don't think that you just catch a few people who are in the film, who are perpetrators in the film. We got Q&A questions where it was like, well, what about the perpetrators? Why didn't you follow them? That's kind of the point, is that it's you could catch one of these guys or you could catch all of these guys, but the system would go on and the new perpetrators would keep coming. We wanted to change the system, and actually people took notice because of that. And it's really a tribute to the film, I think, that Democrats and Republicans got behind the film. We had support in Congress and the Senate from people who do not agree on anything, and yet everybody could get behind this because I think that it's pretty bulletproof. The arguments are pretty bulletproof in the film, and that motivates change. When you've got something that people can use as an example and as cover. Kristen Gillibrand, the senator from New York, just recently had big Senate hearings about this issue, and several of the people on that panel, the senators, were asking these military officials, have you seen The Invisible War? Please respond to that. And boy, as a documentary filmmaker, I know for all of us on the crew, that's really makes it worth it. It's really a moment to kind of take a breath and say, that matters. Yeah.
So you at the end of that film, there's a title card that says Leon Panetta changed this aspect of one of these policies. I mean, what else have you seen happen since then?
Well, it's important to note with that. I mean, it's a great result initially, but what he did was not take the decision to prosecute perpetrators out of the chain of command. He just moved it up the chain of command. So he took it out of the province of the immediate commander or the immediate supervisor and moved it up to a higher rank. Now, that's a step, but it's not entirely what we were talking about. We really think that there should be, external, neutral judicial review in some form or another that allows women and men to go and find recourse for this, And I think until that happens, it's still going to be a closed system. I think there's a call that's growing for some movement towards that. So the good news is the film keeps getting shown. It gets shown at military bases. The military, instead of trying to deny, cover up, or fire back at us, they have embraced the film and they're using it for training.
Oh, that's excellent.
That's like
Great.
the best thing that could happen.
Because in the film you do show the current method of training, which is kind of terrifying.
Yes, I think that was kind of a brilliant bit of investigative journalism that we all participated in. It's unbelievable to see some of the materials that were being used, but I think it was indicative of a larger culture of victim blaming, of it's that boys club mentality that has been prevalent in the military for a long time, and to change that you have to shock people into realizing this wouldn't go in civilian society. That's good for civilian society. I think we've come further there. But in the military, they have to face the fact that these issues have to come out and have to be talked about. So, and they're doing it to a degree.
I think the editing is really important in that because you're highlighting a certain thing that you do want. You're not following these horrible people around and shedding light on them. You're,
Yeah,
you had to point it in the direction
it
where
really
you
is
really
about
wanted
the
to go.
system. Yeah, and I'm very proud to say that we didn't go there because I think that would have made it like so many other films that want blood. They want somebody to be a fall guy for a bigger system. The system's really the problem. Yeah.
So let's shift gears here a little bit. So you talked about sort of issue documentaries and. This Invisible War is definitely an issue documentary, but there's almost like different genres of documentary. So there's like the documentary that's sort of like the issue, like we need to fix this problem, and then there's the documentary that's sort of like informational, that could almost be like a like an educational sort of thing, and then there's documentaries that are just kind of like, look at what these people are doing, isn't it interesting? You've done all these types of films, but let's talk about one of my favorite documentaries of all time, These Amazing Shadows. I love These Amazing Shadows.
Me too.
These Amazing Shadows is a film about ostensibly it's about classic films, but it takes rather than just sort of saying, rather than just playing the greatest hits, it really does what I think is brilliant, and it looks at the Library of Congress list of important films and really discusses that list as the basis for why is this list important, and uses that as a vehicle to kind of talk about why film preservation and why films, classic films, are important to keep around.
Yeah, I mean, talk about a joy of a film to work on. For a film nerd like myself, first of all, I mean, I think we can all agree it's like, let's watch more film clips, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But we had a bigger goal there. It's really, like you said, it's about the National Film Registry, which is the sort of the gold standard of American preservationists at this point. It's where films will be, by all means necessary, preserved forever and ever and ever in their original form. And there's an enormous archive in Washington, D.C. It's actually in Culpeper, Virginia, kind of south of Washington, D.C. And it's this incredible high-tech archive that is storing the print of Citizen Kane.
Wow.
They have the print of The Wizard of Oz. They have the print of, Paths of Glory, all these other films that made this list that comes out every year. Now, there's 25 films, as many as 25 films that they announce every year they're going to preserve. There are classics, obviously, the ones you'd expect that are on there. But then they also preserve documentaries. They preserve unusual newsreels. They preserved home movies. The most famous one is the Zapruder film.
Yep.
The original Zapruder film is in there, and it's it's original reel, and eclectic things that are pieces of cinema history that might not be great films per se, but they were the first time this happened, or they captured this event, or things like that. So it's really it's a phenomenal archive. And what we found not only is we got an hour and a half easy just to show clips, but to frame that up are these amazing people who actually love these films in almost a physical way because they have to deal with them every day. George Williman, who's the centerpiece of the movie, is a preservationist who works at the National at the Library of Congress archives, and he among other things, he is a film nut, and he does a podcast, and he loves to talk about film. But he talked in the film about how he was actually able to discover things in the vault that no one had ever seen before, just because he pulled out a film reel and noticed that it was a different size than a copy.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh my God, this is the uncensored version of this film that we've had forever." And he actually discovered an amazing film called Babyface, which is this incredible Barbara Stanwyck film right at the edge of the point when the film code started. And it is full of just like nasty, salacious stuff and some really interesting bits about women's independence, and those are the things they censored. Like when Barbara Stanwyck shows her moxie and her sexual independence, those are the things that the censors were uncomfortable with, and those are the things they cut out.
Yeah.
So it really says a lot about American culture.
And I remember that the other thing they cut out was he was talking about maybe it was Marxist philosophy or something, or saying something that wasn't the consistent American view.
The grumpy old shoe cobbler who tells her and he's reading Marx, which is so great. They actually replaced the book in the recut. They actually the studio in response to the censors back in 1934 went back and reshot him holding like Guide to Good Behavior or Holy Bible or something. I forget what it was. But that's what they would do to censor the ideas that were coming through these films. And that held sway in Hollywood for 30 years after the code started. That's why I loved working on that film, because it was a discovery for me. I certainly have seen a lot of films, but this was a whole new way to look at movies. The directors were wonderful to work with. Kurt and Paul, who directed the film, are good friends, and they're just they were really concerned about giving light to this pretty obscure part of the government. And I think it's really helped to get the word out about this and to make it, in a time of, let's cut this, let's cut that from the budget, to make a case that this is super important. We've got to preserve these things because they really are the dreams of our century,
And, I think since that film came out almost, really the whole sort of film versus digital argument has really been gaining steam. I don't know if you can take credit for that, but your film doesn't really talk about film versus digital at all. It just talks about this is what we, having these the way they were originally intended to be seen is important. And I think that's as it gets more and more expensive to house, because you need warehouses and then you have to be the right temperature and you have to check these things. You can't just leave them sitting there. Yeah. We've got lots of film archives on campus, and I'm sure they are very concerned about all this to try to figure out how to.
And it's difficult, especially older films that burn like dynamite if they catch fire.
Well, that's the thing that I found really interesting. I didn't realize anyone was trying to preserve nitrate film.
Oh yeah.
I didn't realize. I thought that was like, no, we're done. But apparently there's like 2 places in the country that do it, Library of Congress and one other place.
Yeah, the archives themselves have a system that literally will flood the shelves with water if one of the cans ignites. It's much easier to recover the cans if they don't burn. So if a fire breaks out, instantly they're bathed in a cooling solution to make sure that they don't get out of hand. It's really something to see that. That's the kind of protection we have to have for these. And they're also, of course, transferring those films to digital and doing those kinds of work too. But they want to have the original medium that these films are made on. To see Godfather on 70 millimeter projected correctly that's something. That's really something. And I think, for the real film nerds out there, the Library of Congress has the copy where Hans shoots first. Okay. I think that's important.
Yes.
That'll keep that place funded forever.
Yes, exactly. Especially with this generation coming into power.
Yeah, exactly.
People from my generation starting to be the decision makers all of a sudden. That becomes more and more important.
Right.
In 1,000 years, people will be like, I don't know why we got to keep this one film reel, but it was so important a while ago.
People will forget, we changed that. No, we didn't. No.
So let's talk about a couple films that a couple more recent films. You had one. I haven't seen this one yet. I really wanted to see it at South by Southwest. It's called 20 Feet from Stardom, and it's about. Is it just about backup dancers, or is it about
backup singers? Yeah, the vocalists, primarily, in fact, all African American women who made the sound of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and onward. They labored in obscurity for the most part. Some of them are better known than others. But the real sound of your favorite songs, so much of that, and what the women say very accurately in the film is, a lot of times people, when they're singing to the radio, they're singing to us.
Yeah.
They're not singing. A great example is David Bowie's Young Americans. I mean, if you ever think about Young Americans, what do you sing to? Do you sing to David Bowie's lead
American.
or do you sing to the background vocals?
Yeah.
And that's a great example in the film that's shown. It's about women who were in the music business, and there was that whole crossing the color line in the early 60s. They came in and they changed how those background vocals sounded. Originally, it was a lot of white duets, kind of singing exactly what was printed on the sheet. They brought the power of the gospel church and that improv nature. And when that happened, music broke free. And in a lot of ways, that's a big part of why rock and roll sounded like it did. That's why soul sounded like it did. That's why music that progressed in surprising directions, that's why it sounded like that, because they were there. And they all had careers where, when you're singing in the background, you have to decide, are you a part of a bigger unit or do you want to break out on your own? So the whole film is that tension between being a star and being part of this bigger whole and doing this art that's a really beautiful craft. And I think audiences have really loved it. First of all, it's got a killer soundtrack, but there's some really emotional stories of triumph and falling down and climbing back up. Darlene Love is sort of at the center. She worked with Phil Spector in the 60s and was famously kind of suppressed by his incredible ego. And she was a star in her own right, and there couldn't be two stars in the room. So Phil was the star and Darlene was the servant, basically. And he did everything he could to sort of sabotage her becoming an independent artist herself. But she rises up, and I think everybody will enjoy how it all works out in the film. It's a joyous film. We had such a good time at Sundance, and we had 5 standing ovations, for the 5 screenings, and it was really something to watch. I had such fun being a part of that film.
Yeah. So let's talk about Of Two Minds. That's the film that's playing. Well, it's playing tonight at the cinema. You won't have a chance to see it at the cinema unless you're in the room.
Have your time machine.
Yes. But let's talk about this film. We just did an interview about this earlier in the week, so you can listen to that interview and hear lots of thoughts about it. But maybe you can just describe it for us so people have a sense of it.
It's a film that I directed with my wife, and the film would not exist without my wife because she is making it. The impetus to make it came from her sister, Tina, who suffered from bipolar disorder back in the 90s, in the 80s and the 90s. And at that time, there really was not a lot of awareness of it. There certainly was tons of stigma around it. People kept quiet about it. And I know that her sister was a brilliant, funny, wonderful woman who had to suffer largely in silence with this condition. And so my wife, Lisa, really wanted to connect up with what was that about and why were these things, why did her sister have to go through this stuff? Now, her sister passed away in 1994, so she wasn't going to be really a centerpiece of the film. But we found modern-day stories that followed those same courses that perhaps Tina was on. And I think by doing that, we've told where we're at now in terms of where society's at and where these really wonderful people that we interviewed for 3 full years, where they're at in terms of dealing with mental illness, the stigma, their day-to-day challenges with relationships, all these things. And people, I think, have tuned into it because it's not a medical lecture. We didn't go after big pharma. We didn't do any of that stuff. We're not passing judgment on any particular thing. We're just letting people tell their stories. And when we started, there wasn't a lot of that around. What's really amazing is to watch that it's sort of come out while we've been making the film. We've got Homeland now with Claire Danes. We've got Silver Linings Playbook, had a lot of attention this year. And I think that's a really great thing. I think the media is changing its tune about how it deals with bipolar, and we're just happy to be a part of that. And I think we're getting a lot of notice because people want something that goes a little beyond the Hollywood versions and says, okay, what does this really look like?
Absolutely, yeah.
So, yeah, it's been an amazing journey.
Well, I asked you this off mic during the interview, and I kind of want to get it on mic because you had a really good response. I talked to a couple people about Silver Linings Playbook who said, well, it has kind of a bad message about mental illness. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the thing with Silver Linings Playbook is, it does draw attention to mental illness. The performances are definitely more realistic than we're used to seeing. A lot of times, certainly in the history of Hollywood, it's we go from the snake pit to here is a long journey. But what I'm always bothered by is that there has to be this sort of happy end game, and the film, obviously you want to go to a film to be entertained, but oftentimes in bipolar things don't work out the way they did in Silver Linings Playbook. And I think it's one possible way things can work out. In our film, we don't have easy answers, and we don't have things that happen that way. In fact, in some ways, when we were watching Silver Linings Playbook, we both appreciated Robert De Niro's performance because he plays somebody who has a mental condition, but it's in the background of his character, and it's kind of meshed really well. And again, the end game again is kind of a happy ending. But I think that the portrayal, first of all, was very realistic of OCD for him. Bradley Cooper did a great job with bipolar, but again, it was a little convenient, I think, when he had his episodes, and that it happened exactly when the plot needed those things.
Yeah.
Bipolar doesn't look like that. Things happen at really inconvenient or unusual times, and people are struggling every day with these things, and it doesn't just get better because the plot says it should. You know, so our film really was, here's what really happens day to day, and not all endings are happy, not all endings are convenient. Life goes on with this stuff. Yeah.
So let's talk real quickly about let's real quickly, Of Two Minds. Where can people see that if they don't catch it here at the cinema?
Right. Well, we're happily touring all over the country now. We're playing different communities at different times. We'll be back in Indiana. At the end of May. At the beginning of May, at the Shining Light Film Festival in Indianapolis. So hopefully people can attend that. I think it's May 2nd. I think that's right. So it's a film festival specifically for mental health films, and ironically, Invisible War is showing there as well.
Yeah.
I'm going to be screening around different parts of the country. Lisa's going to be screening as well. We kind of go in different directions and screen when we can. It's screening across Canada right now. And on May 15th, the DVD comes out. So we're really excited about that. It has an extra bonus hour of material. So we're talking about this pile of material. We couldn't make a lot of decisions, so we just put it on the DVD extras.
Had to do something with it, yeah.
We couldn't fit all that stuff in a 90-minute film, and we had to keep the time down. So we said, okay, we've got an hour of bonus material. Let's use it up. And we actually cut in a whole other short film, which is pretty amazing. It's a completely different story than what's in the movie. About the Mad Pride movement, which is sort of like where gay pride was 10 years ago, but with people owning their mental illnesses and marching and demonstrating. And we shot that in Toronto. That's on the DVD. We've got interviews with all kinds of other people. So we're really excited about that DVD, and it's coming out on Amazon. It's going to be available all over the place, commercially. You can download on iTunes. You can eventually see it on Netflix. It'll be a few months yet because we're going to go with the DVD first. And then cable video on demand is going to be there too. So
yeah. So you talked about how having the equipment changes how documentaries are made.
Right.
How about digital distribution with how they're seen?
Huge.
I mean, would anyone see these documentaries if it wasn't for digital?
Well, I'll tell you, I certainly have had a lot more people see my stuff because of Netflix.
Yes.
Because,
well, I mean, I
easy,
literally
on demand.
I tried to look up as many of your films on Netflix. I was like, there'll be one or two. There's like 8 of your films on Netflix. I was like,
I'm wondering if I can craft my own little channel.
Yes.
But yeah, no, it's really great because also for me, for films of my friends that are making the circuit around film festivals, in the old days, if you didn't see it at the film festival, your chances of seeing it commercially released were very low. You had to wait either for an obscure DVD to come out or it just disappeared, and that was really sad. But now Netflix and Hulu and some of these other services are putting stuff out in ways that are super democratic. You can dial them up and you can watch them anytime, and they're unlimited. And I think it's a great thing for getting messages out and getting films to be seen. We still get compliments on wordplay. We get people finding the film for the first time, kids finding it for the first time.
Wordplay is about Will Shortz, an IU alum.
Yes, exactly.
Did you do any?
Is it? Yeah, that's right. It was Indiana Youth Fair. That's right.
Yeah. So did you come to IU at all for that film? Or was
I know
it
Pat
just...
did. I know it was a big deal for Pat, and he showed it all through the Midwest at different times. And I would hope that it would have played very, very popularly here because it's one of the great alums.
Yes, yes, he's right up there with all the others. But yeah, Will Shortz is kind of a deity in some people's eyes.
I'll tell you, Will was a rock star when he was at Sundance and he was walking around town. I mean, that was the year that Paris Hilton's walking up the street going this way. Literally, there are a huge column of people following him and walking into a bookstore for a crossword book signing. He was a rock star at Sundance, and it was really fun to have that whole group of puzzlers as a family all get together and be there. It was hilarious. It was one of the best times I've ever had at a film festival anywhere. Yeah.
Well, I mean, are there any other films here? I mean, you've got so many films here that are of interest. Anything else you want to call out?
There's some really great ones. One that might be of interest on campus would be one I did a few few years ago called Beer Wars, which
Okay.
is about the epic battle between craft breweries and the big corporate brews. And that was a lot of fun to work on with a director named Nat Barron, who actually was a beer executive, was a beer industry executive who decided she really wanted to get the truth out about how this stuff worked.
Yeah.
And she did this sort of investigative piece couched in this sort of wacky overview of the beer industry. But I think there's some real serious issues that come up in it about corporate malfeasance, about corporate domination, about how the legal system works. I mean, there's a whole section of DC lobbying for the beer industry that's owned by Anheuser-Busch InBev and by Miller Brewing and all those guys. And I think in that there were two things about that film. One is that I think you can watch it and be entertained and learn a lot about how things really work. But also, for me, we got free samples
That's worth it right there.
of the craft breweries. Yeah, we got very friendly with some of the craft
Very
breweries.
cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And it's a really fun film that actually is pretty educational. So I think that's a good one to look for. I'm very fond of Outrage, which I did with Kirby Dick, especially given that the Supreme Court is hearing the case about DOMA right now and about Proposition 8 in California. That film is a good primer for what's really sometimes going on in Washington with people who say that they're family values, but they're maybe not living the life you think they are. It kind of, some parts of it are almost comical and some parts are extremely serious and very, very kind of touching and heartrending a little bit. So I'm very proud of that film. I think it did change the dialogue a little bit, especially about Prop 8 in California.
Yeah.
And then there are others.
There's lots. There's lots. And 90% of these are available on Netflix. You could have a Doug Blush Film Festival at your house very, very easily. So I think that's it. Do you have anything else?
I think we're good.
All right.
Thanks, you guys.
Yeah.
It was a great
So we're going to get out of here. Doug, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Sarah, thanks for filling in.
Thank you.
Jason will be back. But again, I don't know if we'll be here next week. I don't know what's happening next week, so we'll find out.
It'll be a surprise.
It'll be a surprise. You'll turn on your internet box and be like, "Where is it?" But then you'll remember that I said we wouldn't be here, maybe. So, anyways, let's get out of here. Thank you guys for listening. I'm Andy,
And I'm Sarah.
This has been, and always will be, A Place for Film. A Place for Film is recorded at WFIU Studios in Bloomington, Indiana.